So today's workshop is Your Child, Their Future, Using Parental Expertise to Prepare Children for Life After High School. I'm excited to introduce to you Dr. Jacqui Kelleher, the Executive Director of the Vermont Family Network, John Spinney, the Postsecondary Transition Coordinator for the Students with Disabilities Student Support Services Division of the Vermont Agency of Education, and Emma Rose McCadden, Alternate Assessment Coordinator, Student Support Services at the Vermont Agency of Education. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, everybody. My name is Emma Rose, and I am here from the Vermont Agency of Education. I'm going to apologize up front that I am getting over an illness here, and so my voice is not as strong as it usually is. The purpose of today's presentation, as Jacqui, John, and I are going to present to you, is that we would like to equip families with tools that they need in order to very meaningfully engage in the transition process for their child. Next slide. And so we have a couple of objectives for today. We want to ensure that we provide these things by the end of our presentation. So we're going to start with an overview of the requirements for an IEP transition plan in Vermont for our Vermont students, and discuss the importance of family engagement in creating and following through with this plan. We will then discuss the importance of including your child when appropriate in this plan and a framework for how to consider your own personal and family culture in this transition plan. And then we will end with some navigational advice around common issues and concerns that may arise in transition planning. Next slide. I'm going to turn it over here to John, who will help with those first two objectives.
Hi, everybody. Happy to be here and working with VFN again. So as it was mentioned, I work for the Agency of Education. I've been there 18 years, and I also am a sibling. My two youngest brothers both have Down syndrome and were adopted as infants, and I'm also their legal guardian now. And I just to sort of see how they transition to the community and the employment world has been very helpful just overall in my role. So what I'm gonna touch on today is really kind of giving an overview, just sort of a basic overview of the IEP transition process. But really I want to highlight how parent expertise of your child can improve the transition process. Next slide. So let's see, let me just, sorry. All right, so when your child reaches the age of 16, if they are on an IEP, it's required that they have what is called a post-secondary transition plan in the IEP. This plan is designed to help students with disabilities learn critical skills that they will need to be successful in their future employment, future education and training, as well as independent living. Prior to building this IEP transition plan, it's critical and it's also required that the special educator that's working with your child, the case manager, uses transition assessments to assess for the student's strengths, needs, preferences, and interests as they relate to the future employment, future education and training, and future independent living. So this is actually a really critical process, and it's how the transition plan gets started. It's the initial step. It's to do this variety of assessments to gather information on these different areas around strengths, needs, preferences, and interests as they relate to these three domains. Employment, education, and training are considered one domain. That's like future education and training, like higher ed, and then independent living. So the reason that one of the main things I want to really impart here is that parents are experts on their children, and special educators should be utilizing this parent expertise. especially in the transition assessment process, to help identify these strengths, needs, preferences, and interests as they relate to these future domains. So it's really important to have that parent expertise, to have that parent voice, because it's going to make the transition plan more effective. It's going to make the transition plan more authentic if it's really drawing in on accurate information about those strengths, needs, preferences, and interests. Next slide. So like I said, parents are the experts on their child's strengths, needs, preferences, and interests. And also, some of this is being repeated just for this slide, and I kind of just wanted to really add the emphasis that special educators really need to hear from parents on this topic. It will make the transition plan much more effective. So I'm always going to encourage the special educators to help draw out this information from parents, because it's going to be good. It's going to, like I said, improve the overall outcomes of that transition plan, and you know what that student's going to be doing after they leave high school. Next slide. So as far as the transition process, like it starts with these assessments, okay? And once that data is collected, the special educator now has this information to start to build out the rest of the plan. Now there are 8 elements of the transition plan. We're not going to get into all that, the sort of nitty-gritty of each of those, but basically they do the transition assessments, they collect that data, and then that data is then used to create post-secondary goals that are, they're actually outcomes. These are things that the student is, hoping to achieve after they graduate, and they're actually written as an outcome. So for example, will be employed at, within XYZ industry, or will be enrolled in CCV or UVM, will be living independently, or will be living independently with supports. So they create these post-secondary goal outcomes, which are sort of these guideposts that the student's going to achieve after they graduate. And then underneath that are the annual goals, the annual IEP goals. And I'm going to talk more about that because that's another key intersection for parent expertise. You have these annual goals, and then you have supporting transition services for each of those annual goals. And then you have a course of study that is designed to help that student meet those post-secondary goals/outcomes. So after these post-secondary outcomes are created, based on that assessment data that hopefully the parent has given their expertise in. So after those outcomes are created, we start to work on the annual IEP goals within the transition plan. And this, like I said, this is another key area for parents to weigh in. These goals should be focused on a skill that student needs in light of how their disability will impact their future employment, education and training, and independent living. It's really the most important part of the transition plan. Like once it's completed, it's these annual goals. This is the chance for your child to be working on these skills that are going to help them after they leave high school. Next slide. So the identification of these skills is where parent expertise can really help optimize the time spent developing the most critical skills so that the student is successful. Maybe they need to practice skills related to executive functioning and following a schedule. Maybe they need to develop 100% proper hygiene due to the fact they're going to be going into the culinary industry. Maybe they need to address some math skills in order to be successful in the work they will do after high school. The annual goal is really where the school articulates a key skill that they need, and then what it's going to look like. How often do they need to be practicing this? What level of proficiency that they need to hit? And when is it expected that the student meets the goal? There should be a date. By the way, we monitor school districts as well. And so there is a quality control layer here that is done by the Agency of Education. We're not going to really get into that, but feel free to ask me questions about that later or email me if you have questions about how that works. So honing in on how the student's disability impacts their life as it relates to this post-school world of employment, education and training, and independent living is really this key area that parents can help with. So really what I want to impart are the two main areas within the transition plan that parents can really help with is the transition assessments and then those annual goals, and really drilling into those key skills. Next slide. Just some key questions for parents to consider prior to the IEP meeting that's going to be talking about transition planning. What does the young person want to do with his or her life? What are his or her dreams, aspirations, goals? What are the student's strengths, needs, preferences, and interests as they relate to the domains? What are the outcomes that the youth and parents want after high school graduation? Will the student attend their IEP meetings, and could they even help lead their IEP meetings? What skills does the student need around self-advocacy? Do they need a goal around self-advocacy and time to practice that throughout the year? What are the programs, services, and accommodations or modifications that the person wants or needs? Next slide. Okay, so I just threw in a couple example annual goals. We do have a new resource that I could put a link in the chat when I'm done talking. And it's just it's an overarching resource that is, you know, it's really for schools, but there's nothing, there's no reason it could, you know, parents couldn't view it as well. It's a great resource, and it does have a lot of examples of different transition plans and different kinds of goals. Now, when I'm gonna read through a sample goal for each of the three domains, and just be thinking about the underlying skills, you know. So here is this chance for this student, let's say they're in their final year of high school. These annual goals are really critical. This is their last shot at practicing these critical skills before they leave the world of special education. So for an example for education and training, in preparation for the academic demands of auto mechanics training in a community college, Paul will improve his reading comprehension by answering literal and inferential questions after reading a nonfiction passage at the 8th grade level with 85% accuracy by the annual review date. So it's measurable. We know when the student is expected to finish it. We know what level the student is expected to hit. And it's this reading comprehension. The IEP team has determined, hopefully with parent expertise, that this is a really key area for them, that it's a critical skill that they need to develop to be successful in their future work in the automotive industry. Employment. In order to be successful in future employment, Jody will correctly read a minimum of 50 words related to community locations or her work, such as those that might be listed in work memos or bus schedules within 4 seconds of seeing them 3 times in a row by the end of the school year. So these goals are all following a SMART goal format. So specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and time specific. And we do a lot of work. This is actually takes up a lot of my time. I do a lot of work with special educators around goals like this. Because sometimes we'll see an IEP transition plan that will just say something to the effect of the student is going to meet with higher ability or something like that, which is great. That's more of a transition service. And it's also part of this interagency collaboration that is inherent in transition planning, but that's not a goal. These are the kind of goals that we are trying to work with schools on developing. Next slide. So here's the last example I have. It's for independent living. Don will improve his emotional regulation, coping, and problem-solving skills as described in his behavior plan in order to live independently in a college dormitory by demonstrating the following objectives. Following classroom and school rules 90% of the time without a prompt, naming personal difficulties and 1 to 2 ways to appropriately cope with each of these difficulties 9 out of 10 times by the annual review. So there's also an inherent layer of special educator follow-up on these kinds of goals because they need to have a way of monitoring the progress of these goals. So even though it wasn't stated, you know, sometimes you do see that at the end of the goal, like as evidenced by special educator observation and documentation, but it's essentially kind of assumed in that regard because the special educator is going to need to track this. In some cases, the IEP team, particularly with parents that are really involved, the parent might be helping with sort of tracking some of that information and then relaying it to the special educator. So sometimes we see that as well. Next slide. So I believe everybody's going to get a copy of this PowerPoint, but this first link right here where it says parent questionnaire, that's actually a great transition assessment on its own. So this would be something that a special educator could hand to you as a parent before they write the transition plan. And it's a way to gather your expertise as a parent. And this is really a critical way to improve the quality of that IEP transition plan. So, like I said, I'm always encouraging special educators to do this, to tap into the parent expertise, because it's going to make the transition plan better for the student. The next link that's there is the transition assessment planning form, and that's another really good tool for IEP teams before the transition plan is created. And what that form does is it helps everybody look at, well, what assessments do we need to do? What do we need to assess for across the 3 domains? What areas should we focus in on? And of course, that some type of assessment where the parents get to weigh in is highly, highly recommended. And like I said, it's a really important piece. And then that next link is the Vermont Graduation Readiness Tool, which years ago, VFN was also involved in helping create this. And this is that tool is recommended to start using when a student is a freshman. And so each annual IEP meeting, review that readiness tool. Have the student assess themselves. IEP team members can weigh in, and it has sort of it's attempting to quantify readiness for graduation. And it also serves as sort of a checklist as to, well, what things need to still happen prior to graduation. So it's a really good thing for IEP teams to do every year in the lead up to graduation. Next slide. This is just a quick slide, you know, peripheral work that's happening in the transition world. So we have a state level core transition team. Maybe you've heard about local core transition teams, and we have a conference in Killington for those local teams. Those local teams serve to address and problem solve transition related issues in their communities. The state team is literally looking at state level issues like increasing students who are on IEPs, the number of those students accessing dual enrollment, for example. That's sort of one of the issues that this team is going to be looking at. Also at AOE, we are working with developmental services on a project where we're working on improving the handoff from high school to the folks in the developmental services offices in terms of the handoff, in terms of the staffing and what that's going to look like when a student transitions. And in some cases, that transition is bumpy and rocky, and we want it to be as smooth as possible. And that brings us to this next week. Vermont was awarded a very big $10 million transition specific grant. We have 3 pilot high schools, and we're going to be trying different activities to enhance transition planning at those high schools. And one of those is to improve the transition with that handoff to developmental services. So there is going to be some work happening at those 3 pilot high schools. So stay tuned on that. Next slide. Okay, I'm all set now. Now, please feel free to put questions in the chat, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions, and thanks for having me. Okay, I'm going to hand it off to Emma Rose.
Thank you, John. So in my section here, we're going to talk a little bit about the cultural humility that you can have, you can ask from your IEP team when considering your family's values, beliefs, and perspectives. And then also talk a little bit about the individual, talk about your child themselves and how to make sure that we're including them in designing and following through on their transition plan. Next slide. So I'm going to start here by orienting you to this theory here. We're not going to go too deep into it, but basically looking at this here, it's called the ecological systems theory. And it's something that we use often in both the educational and the medical world when talking about how to think about an individual and what influences them and what's a part of their environment. So we start at the very center. I think if you hit next, it'll go to zoom in a little bit, make it easier to see. Yeah, lovely. Okay. So starting in the center there, we have the individual, so your child. And this is going to be anything that is independently related to who your child is, what their strengths are, what challenges they may face, etc. And we move one out to the microsystem. This is going to be your child's immediate environment. So as we talk about how to include factors for your child individually, we're going to talk about these systems here. Your child's immediate environment is going to include you, your family. It's going to include their peers, or it could include both their medical or their school teams, whatever's appropriate. One section out is what we call the mesosystem. And this is going to be the interactions that occur between your family and your school team. It's going to be maybe how well you know your child's peers' parents, right? It's going to include all of these interactions within that microsystem. We bump one out further and we talk about the exosystem. This is going to be your broader context for your child, but still very local. So it's going to be things like what local policies impact what's available to your child. It could be whether or not your school is a part of that pilot project that John mentioned. And it can also include things like, is there a rec center nearby to your home? So it's anything that is local, but in the broader context. And then when we get all the way out to the furthest system, it's going to be the macro system, which is the wider context that you exist in. And this is where culture comes into play. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to consider culture when referencing your student. And so things that might shape your family's philosophies around education or around transition and adulthood will exist out here. And then that last circle out there is called the chronosphere, and it's just really how these environments are shaped by time, right? So maybe you had the same, maybe you live in the town that maybe you lived in the town you live in now when you were a child. And so you might have existed in these same environments, but the way that time might impact what that environment looks like is going to be that last system there. And so the purpose of using this system and showing you is just so we can house each of the things I want to talk about within this system. So thinking about when we talk about the individual, what is specific to them? And then when we talk about the environmental factors that might impact your child, we're talking about each of these layers, the micro, meso, exo, and macro systems. The names of those are less important than the idea that each of them is housed within the other and they each support the other. Next slide. So I want to start with talking about that core there, your child piece. I know it is common to know that we should include children whenever we can when talking about their plans. But I want to talk a little bit about what that might look like and what that will mean to your child. So each of these is based on, I'll give the context that I'm finishing my PhD right now at UVM, and I do a lot of this research as a part of my dissertation. But for your child themselves, including your child in their transition plan and making them a part of that team in whatever way is appropriate for them developmentally and interest-wise, will build a lot of skills that actually end up being pivotal for their successful transition. So this starts with being able to build self-determination. So self-determination is your child's capacity to make choices that are related to their own lives, to their own careers, their relationships, and their well-being, both physical and mental. It's also shown that including children will increase their skill building for self-advocacy. So this is your child's ability to stick up for themselves well and will iteratively impact their capability to build their own independence. So the more that they are practicing self-advocacy in these groups, the more that it'll positively impact their belief that they can do it again, and their self-advocacy will improve as they witness themselves being successful, even with help, in advocating for what they want in their transition plan, what they think adulthood will look like for them. And using this within the transition planning process and with implementing their transition plan will help prepare them to make decisions for themselves, whether it's small, like flexing with unexpected changes and working through that, or more structural changes around their life goals and their decision making. And then lastly, there's lots of research that shows that young adults who are given the opportunity to engage in their own decision-making regarding their plans are more motivated to follow through with them. I know that sometimes one of the stumbling points can be that a child might just not agree with the plan that's laid out for them, and that might be a challenge. And that's something to be respected, because agency is definitely key. So making sure that a child feels involved and is involved in this planning process can help with them feeling positively about engaging in these practices and working towards these goals. And then one key thing to think about here is not to let anyone tell you otherwise, especially when dealing with the population that I work with most is non-speaking and minimally speaking students. So those students especially need to have practices put in place to make sure their voice is still heard in this setting. Next slide. And so one key kind of structuring question that I think is really important when talking about your child and their desires, I know John brought up, like, what does that look like for your child? Transition to what, right? So we want to think about what a full life looks like for your specific child. More and more in both the medical and educational communities, we talk about determinants for quality of life and quality years that people can have. And so I understand that it is very important to think about building independence. And for some families more than others, that might be more or less important to think about their child being at some point fully independent from them. But while you're thinking about those questions, make sure that you're also considering things like joy, because joy and belonging and satisfaction are actually also linked to determinants for a long life and for health and longevity, both in the physical and the mental health worlds. So when, just like any adult, when you're thinking about, is it your job that makes you feel fulfilled and for you to go to bed with a full heart at the end of the day, or is it another part of your community? So what else might contribute to those pieces for your child? What makes them feel incredibly happy? What makes them feel proud? And how can you build that into the plan for them to transition into adulthood? Next slide. So one way that you can kind of shape how you think about this is to create these 4 bins. So within thinking about your child and in that micro and individual system, in that individual core, we have personal factors. So these are things about who your child is or how they operate or what they do or don't like that is going to make the transition plan you created easier for them, right? So what is going to make that easier? And we call that a facilitator. So what is going to facilitate the ease of transition for your child that is about who they are versus barriers? So what is going to make the desired transition that they have more difficult for them? What are those challenges and how can you identify them with the team? And then on a broader context and those additional layers, what are the environmental factors? So what about your immediate or your extended environment will make their transition easier? And what about it might make it harder? So again, a facilitator or a barrier to them on the environmental level. Using this scaffolding with your IEP team, talking about their personal and environmental factors, is in line with more modern views of disability, where the individual and their environment are both considered as independent and impacting each other. And the use of talking about a facilitator is very in line with talking about a strengths-based approach. Next slide. And so moving out to the broader context, that very furthest out layer of that diagram, we're going to talk about culture. So it is important to note that when we're thinking about culture, we're talking about even very small differences. So it is challenging to get on the same page as somebody when you come from different cultural contexts, because it means that we might hold different values or beliefs or perspectives on what a transition would look like, what adulthood means, etc. And so when considering culture, it can be challenging to speak up in an environment, and I recognize that as a self-advocate myself, but it is important to recognize what is meaningful to your family, what is meaningful to your child, and what is culturally relevant for you. And then to be able to voice how your school can support your child as they integrate into their community and their culture of adulthood. So something to consider here is to make sure that you voice what adulthood and independence means to you, right? So what does it mean to you? What does it mean to your family? And what does it mean within your cultural context? Next slide. And so lastly, I want to just give you, to embolden you to say these things in your IEP team and to not think that they're not critically important. So more and more in both, again, the educational and the medical communities, we talk a lot about cultural humility. So it is best practice for emerging educators to be taught to be very receptive and very eager to hear about your cultural context as a family. So cultural humility will be when somebody has an approach to the process of understanding you and your values and your beliefs and your traditions and your perspectives, where they are willing to learn and incorporate those things and not to ever assume that they already know. So they should always be open to hearing what that means for you. And just to make sure that you know that only you and your family can ensure that your family's values are included in this transition plan. So I encourage you to feel emboldened to speak up and speak loudly about this, because it is a very pivotal and important component of creating a plan for your child. Next slide. So I'm going to turn it over to Jacqui now, and she will be going over some of that navigational advice that I mentioned about some common issues that can arise in transition planning and what you might be able to do about them. Jacqui, take it away.
Thank you, Emma Rose. Good morning. Good to see you. Jacqui Kelleher, Executive Director for VFN for the past year. Prior to that, I have over 25 years experience in education. I think even or more relevant to this conversation is I'm the parent of 4 now adult children with disabilities, disorders, and special health concerns. Speak fluent IEP from the parent perspective. And I actually took the opportunity to prepare for this by looking at my kids' transition plans. Essentially, my part of this workshop is all the things I wish I knew. This is not an exhaustive list. I encourage you to add additional things into the chat. This is also not reflective on all school districts. It shouldn't be generalized, but I'm speaking from experience and also speaking from the many years that I've worked with other parents in our disability community. So let's begin. Next slide. Things like driving and transportation. Now like 5 or 6 years out into the system, these were things that in my particular community that weren't really emphasized. And especially in a small rural state like Vermont, our adults, how are they, able to either acquire a driver's license, and what are some of the specially designed instruction we need to get them there? How are we going to navigate public transportation? These are things to think about that we can put in to their individualized plans. When we, John was talking about, some of the requirements with transition plans and about, bringing outside agencies into the table, agencies that your adult child might need to access. I've seen cases where kids that might have academically strong performance have not appropriate indicated when it came to were agencies invited, not appropriate. Well, lessons learned. we should not be making decisions purely based on academic performance and advancing from grade to grade or passing grades. We need to consider like the whole context for the future of our kids, which goes to the next point. Activities of daily living. What is age appropriate? Sometimes activities of daily living aren't necessarily considered because they might, educational and functional performance might not be, assessed as thoroughly in some cases, especially for kids that, are advancing and, academically. The summary of performance is actually this important tool. It's that summary of everything. Now, with all my kids and all of my IEPs, I've got vaults of paperwork, right? And, to be able to do next steps, after exiting or graduation, it's overwhelming. What kind of tools, can I use to, help with higher education or training and getting those supports or speaking to employers? I found the summary of performance to be the most valuable tool that we had. It synthesized all those things together. A snapshot of my kid, the type of supports or accommodations that might need, some recommendations. It was such a neat tool to bring to a disability office with a college, university, community college, or a training center. It was a tool that we were able to use when we were trying to identify what type of workplace accommodations that they might use. So using that summary of performance, ask for support and help of how to maximize the use of this really powerful document. Driving home the job, the internship experience, the job shadowing, as a way to truly get, beyond just the community, but to get some of those, early skills, being able to rotate in different areas, making sure that is an option. And then you as a parent, being able to be fully engaged with the progress that they're making in that internship and how you can reinforce at home and have conversations at home about that particular experience. I also really wish that we had been talking earlier on about what kind of accommodations might my child need in the workplace when they got out, beyond the accommodations in the school setting, what that looks like. There's no IEPs after we exit and graduate. That goes away. But we do still have our civil rights law. Tell me about that. What are my rights and protections, under Section 504, the civil rights about reasonable accommodations, and what is my kid gonna need? And then John mentioned transition assessments. And as a parent, that word assessment, I'm thinking test. I'm thinking it's a loaded word. What does this mean exactly? And how do I interpret this information? And people are there, your IEP, that should be able to interpret it in words and language and description that you understand. You can ask questions at any time, and you should ask questions. It can be overwhelming. It can be even intimidating. Knows these things, but I don't as a parent. That doesn't allow you to be fully equipped as an engaged partner if you have those questions, that understanding. So take a pause and ask for it. Next slide. Things I wish I knew, how complicated it was going to be to navigate through all these systems. Can we talk about that before we exit and graduate? With my child, with my student, but also as a parent. What are protections against discrimination? What happens when my kid turns 18 and I am not clear about supported decision-making or guardianship, or if they are ready, to take on their IEP and other responsibilities at 18, what does that process look like? And, when our will have to be a vote with me as a parent when my child turns 18, and that there becomes that, overlap in responsibilities and privacies. And, these are things to talk about way earlier. 16 is our current law of NOAA, middle school 14. These are things that we want to be getting a handle on before the exit. How to extend the school learning to the home. Really important. John was mentioning earlier, he talked about in that example about 1 to 2 ways to cope in that particular IEP goal. I want to make sure as a parent that it can be generalized outside of the school-based setting. How do I help them practice at home or practice in the community? Those particular skills that they're working on in the classroom. Many other things that we learned is that there are, in order to provide evidence of a documented disability, there are some settings where that has to be renewed every 3 years. Where do I go? Who is considered to be an appropriate provider with the appropriate credentials to be doing those assessments into adulthood? Would have liked to have known what that was going to look like as we encounter different medical situations or having to, show documentation for various reasons. If your child is using certain technologies as part of their work, and you want to also be able to support them at home or be, completely involved, ask for training on the assistive technology or the different technologies. And there's a lot of technologies, and it's changing by the minute. So also, if there are differences between what the school is suggesting, around the goals or course of studies, and it's not what you prefer, engage in dialogue. Sometimes I just let it, go over me without being fully engaged with my own beliefs, but say something. You are an equitable partner at an IEP team. And this is the exciting time for thinking about what is ahead for your child. What is that going to look like? Next slide. Independent living, financial literacy, everything from budget management to being able to use my debit card. Some of our kids need to be able to differentiate between the types of coins, that $1, $5, $10, making sure that all of those key life skill pieces are there. And again, it was things like that's maybe not, we're working on the social, emotional, and the coping, and maybe financial literacy isn't as important. It's an individualized, decision. But again, these were things that I really should have pushed for. Social and recreational goals. I mean, recreational services are like a part of a related service. Some kids need to know how to use their leisure time, how to navigate between networking and friendships, and how to relax, how to play. Accommodations that my kids have in school. How do we know they're going to work in the workplace? If my child doesn't want to attend an IEP, I was very fortunate that I had two of my kids with autism and ADHD. They were naturally inclined to be their own self-advocates. And it was within their experience, by the time they were exiting their program, they were leading their IEP meetings. And we got that written into the IEP, that self-advocacy skills. And the special ed teacher, as part of their resource room time, would practice with them, and finding out their interests, needs, and concerns, and how to share and articulate. But then we have kids that may not want to attend the IEP. How can we provide some encouragement? Maybe they're not sure about, this process. It's like, how do we educate them about that this is their blueprint? These are their guidelines. So self-advocacy skills, I just spoke to that. Don't be afraid to take a pause and ask questions if things are moving too fast. A most underutilized requirement within the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is parent training and counseling as a related service. It is a related service. If you require training to be an equitable partner, if you need training about child development, if you need training about understanding characteristics of your child's disability, these are things you can ask for to get the information and support and skill development that you need, so you can really contribute. More information at Vermont Family Network, which is your parent training and information center. We can support you. Next slide. I only have we only have a few more minutes because we wanted to open up for question, but I'll just highlight a few on each of these slides because you'll get the slide deck. Schools want to do the right thing. Teachers are so passionate about everything that they do. So this is like, again, I'm not making some sweeping generalizations, but I also worked for 15 years with undergrad and graduate pre-service students that were preparing to be both general ed and special ed teachers. And over the years, I had hundreds of parents come in, and there were things that they experienced that they say can serve as barriers. And so we have a list here, and I'll just highlight some that some of these things can just be barriers to being able to have a fully full partnership with transition planning and with the IEP. And some of them may be against the law, as we see here. Things like transition plan's already written. All you got to do is sign it. We did the work for you. No, you are a partner in this process. Specific times when IEP meetings have to be done, or we only do it for 30 minutes, or there's a cap on how many times that we can talk about these things. That's not in the federal law. You need to be able to have the opportunity at the pace that is appropriate to have a full appropriate individualized transition plan for your child. Next slide. You can only receive your transition goal updates when we issue report cards. No, you can see them, when you need to. And, if that's like the only time that, you're able to access that information, that's not the natural flow of how we're trying to support, our child. And, if you have concerns, and another point might be, well, we can discuss that when we have their annual meeting, and that annual meeting is not happening the next day or even the next week. No, this is to really move forward, that the timing is important. And your days fly by so fast that these are just valuable opportunities to tap into the expertise of your school, but also make sure that your voice is fully equitably weighing into these conversations. You can discuss it before the annual meeting. Next slide. We send you the draft, you provided your feedback. We don't need to go over that here at this meeting. No. And again, this is not everybody, but these are things that parents have said over the years that just prove to be not equitable partnership. No, you can't see that data prior to the meeting. Of course you can. Next slide. We don't have data to support that. We don't provide, IEP goals or accommodations and supports for extracurricular activities. That was another aha. It was okay, the full day within the public setting, the type of accommodations and supports that are necessary are implemented for school-based activities, even if they're outside of the classroom. Personal hygiene and care is not something we work on at the school. Absolutely not. Specific targeted schools around hygiene, under daily living skills, absolutely is important. They're not asking for their accommodations, any type of services that are, as a result of staff shortages. We have deep empathy around the workforce shortage. We get it. But that can't be a reason why not to, have this if it has been an IEP team decision. Next slide. In terms of another challenge that we ran into about my child wanted to take advanced placement classes, AP classes, and there was a problem there. He has an IEP that the AP wouldn't be appropriate. No, we did, we were able to find ways to make that happen, and it met his interest, and he really wanted that experience to try before school. So we made it happen, but it was, it was really not met with acceptance because of that label. But it is possible. It is true. We're only allowed to list 3 IEP goals or 3 transition goals. There is also no requirement around the number and nature of these goals, except for the specificity of what is in their content. Next slide. Dream big, have high hopes. Always remember, everyone has strengths. The picture you see today is not who your child will be in the future. Always have high expectations in all teachers, all administrators, everybody at that team. Your kid deserves nothing, except the highest of those expectations as you're designing these plans and dreaming for the future. Thank you.
Okay, so if you have any questions, and we're certainly going to open the chat. I've received a few questions here, which I'll be happy to read out. I want to thank our presenters because we may not have a chance at the end, but this was an excellent, rich, informative presentation, and I'm so very happy that you all participated, and I'm glad that we archived these. So the very first question I'm going to be asking, actually, there was a comment. One parent said the whole thought of everything here is overwhelming as far as transition planning goes. Another parent had a comment. I'd love to know how homeschooling families could adopt any information into our own plans. Maybe we'll pause there. Does anyone from our speakers want to address the question about the homeschooling, how they can adapt it? Thank you, John.
Yeah, I can chime in on that. As far as homeschool students, there's a lot you can glean from just the transition process. So there's no reason you can't just go look at those transition plans, look at the template, look at kind of some of the samples of the goals. And, the key is really kind of tuning into those strengths, needs, preferences, and interests, and the skills. What skill does that student need in light of their disability? And they need time to practice it, hands-on, getting in it, doing it and learning from doing it. And there's no reason you can't do that as a homeschool student. So certainly lots that you can glean from there. And, if you want more resources, feel free to email me. And Martha has lots of resources as well on this, and Jacqui as well. So yeah, don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you, John. We have another question. Can we talk a little bit more about the graduation readiness tool? Is it something that all IEP teams are expected to do? Can you explain a little bit more about the graduation readiness tool and how it's used?
Okay, good question. The reason we have that tool is that years ago, IEP teams and school districts, some schools would just have their student, if they had a developmental disability, they would just continue until they're 22, and that was sort of the culture at that high school. And then other districts, might be graduating students too early, and so we wanted a way to try to quantify that readiness. And so it's really important for IEP teams to be talking about this and reviewing it starting in freshman year. And what it does is it allows the team to be looking ahead. What else do we need to do? Because keep in mind, this is a key statement I'm about to say. In order to graduate in Vermont, it's not just about meeting those local graduation requirements in terms of the credits or the proficiencies, okay? If that student is on an IEP, it's more than that. It's about reasonable and appropriate access to transition services. Emphasis on the access. And if there has not been enough access to transition, then the IEP team can decide, look, we want to have our student continue beyond their typical cohort as long as they're not yet 22. The team can choose to do that. And so that tool is really sort of a transition checklist, as well as a way to quantify how close they are to graduation, and have we had our student, have they had enough access to transition services? And that tool helps that.
Thank you, John. So a follow-up to that question is, what if a parent says, I found out that my son, who I thought was going to be remaining in school till their 22nd birthday, my team just contacted me. My child is 18, and my team said, hey, guess what? We think your child's ready. We've looked at the readiness toolkit, and we're going to graduate your son. What's a parent's choice in that, and how does a parent respond to that if they're not in agreement?
If the parent is not in agreement, you have your parental rights, okay? And the very first step would be to just say to your case manager, your special ed case manager, you're really not comfortable with this. You don't feel like this is right. You don't feel that your student has had enough access to transition. And if that doesn't go well, go to the special ed director. And if that doesn't go well, request mediation. That's
Thank you.
really, yeah.
So that would be best for a parent probably to put in writing as well. So I have one more question, unless anything else comes up in our chat. There was a question around a summary of performance. And I think a lot of parents aren't really aware of what this is or how it can help shape a student's future when they exit high school. Who's involved in writing it? Are parents involved? Are students involved? And can you talk a little bit more about that? Any one of you, thank you.
I mean, I'm happy to start it off, and then Jacqui has a lot of experience with this as well, so she might want to chime in. I'll just quickly say the summary of performance is like a passport in a way. You know, it's, you know, all this great information that the school has learned about your child is summarized here. It's like what worked well for your student. You know, what are their strengths? What were some of the challenges? What were some of the accommodations that worked well? What were some of the modifications? The idea of this plan is that it could go to a student support office at a college and help that person then help your child meet their post-secondary goals. It could go to a developmental services office to help them further improve the work that they do with the graduate. It could go to an employer. It's up to the student how they would want to use it. And the student is involved in creating it and should be driving it, because this summary of performance is for them. Okay, it's for them to be able to hand off to these future partners. That certainly parent expertise can be a part of it, but again, it's the students' take on all this. And you know, we also encourage just typical language. We don't like to use sort of nitty-gritty special education terms and things. For lack of a better description, we want just a typical employer to be able to look at it and have some understanding of your student. Again, it's up to the student who they share this document with. Jacqui, do you want to add anything else?
Yeah, just the other part of that question is, just like the entire document, you are an equitable partner. And so I was able to weigh in. And for example, of one of my kids, when I was reading their summary of performance, it was very important for me to have listed in there that this now adult child needed explicit instruction, that when they got vague terms for things, you know, such as like in the workplace, I mean, do this quickly, they just needed either step by step or very explicit pieces that hadn't been in there, but that was something that I advocated for, and we were able to craft it, and they had better educationese to be able to put my, you know, thoughts into it. But it was a very important tool that we were able to use when determining the type of supports they needed in the employment and the types of supports that they needed with their disability units on their community college and college campuses.
Thank you, Jacqui. And this is just for students with IEPs, or does this also apply to students on 504 plans?
The summary of performance is actually part of IDEA, special education. It's kind of like the bookend, if you will, in terms of special ed, you know, prior to that student graduating. The summary of performance is typically created within 2 to 3 months of graduation. But in terms of 504, in some ways, similar to what I was saying with homeschool, there's no reason you can't kind of create your own version of this, you know. So the key being, what are the real things that really helped your student? Some of these key accommodations, like being able to explain certain things, really helps. It's for the future employer. It's for that future office at the college that might be working with your student. It's to help. It's to just kind of carry the flame a little bit into the future.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Jacqui. So I'm going to look in the chat one more time. We're coming up to the end. And I'll just read the comment. The comment from one of our guests is, it was validating to hear others. I can't believe they said that comments. Do you think this comes from a lack of knowledge or something else?
I'll answer that. Martha, invite me back for another hour session and we can unpack that comment. I can't do it justice right at the moment, given the time. And I have an 11 o'clock too, but I just want to thank everyone so much for being here. Or email me directly and I can answer it fully.
All right, well, stay
Thanks,
tuned.
everyone.
Stay tuned. All right, so I'm going to again thank everyone for coming today. We are very grateful that our presenters are here and that information was really helpful. Please look in our chat. There's an evaluation there, and please take a few minutes to fill those out. It really helps us make improvements and fulfill our grant requirements. We have many more workshops coming up, and you can find details about those on our homepage of our website, vermontfamilynetwork.org, along with the links to previously recorded ones. We have tons of information on our website. Getting connected with us is very easy. You can follow us on Facebook or join our closed Facebook page. We have two closed Facebook, one for all parents of children with disabilities and special health needs, and one for those with adult children. You can also sign up for our monthly e-newsletter, check out our YouTube channel. We are here to help, and please contact us by phone or email. We have lots of great programs, and our family support consultants are always there ready to help families. So again, thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you to our presenters. Great presentation and great questions. Thank you.
Thank you